Okay, hi everybody. Thank you for joining today's session, Change and Leadership, a brief introduction. So the session today is going to be led by Dr. Paul Armstrong, who is the Deputy Course Director of our MA in Educational Leadership in Practice here at the University of Manchester. So this is a 2-year part-time online blended learning course delivered at the University of Manchester. So Dr. Paul Armstrong is going to lead on today's session, and he will be introducing the concepts of change and leadership within education, and he'll be drawing on research and theory within these areas. So for those of you who have joined us live today, please submit any questions, comments and thoughts in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. If you're listening back to this session on YouTube, please do contact me by emailing studyonline@manchester.ac.uk with any questions that you have from today's session, or you want to find out a little bit more about this degree programme. So before I hand you over to Paul, I want to briefly introduce myself. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Daisy James and I am one of the course advisors here at the University of Manchester. So I've got over 4 years of experience within student recruitment and higher education, and I manage a variety of different online and blended learning courses here at the University of Manchester. So the MA in Educational Leadership in Practice, a course that you've expressed an interest in, sits within my portfolio here at the university. So I'm responsible for delivering webinars such as this one and individual Zoom consultations with prospective students like yourself. So this is an aspect of my role that I really enjoy doing. It's a chance for me to get to know you, your academic and professional background, and to really kind of help you make that informed decision about taking the next steps and hopefully applying to this degree programme. Like I said, just to reiterate, my main role is to really support you and offer guidance at every stage of your application journey. So please do get in touch with me by emailing studyonline@manchester.ac.uk, and I'd be more than happy to support you and hopefully make this happen for you. So Paul, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of lead on today's session.
Okay, thank you, Daisy. Thanks for that introduction. I'm not so sure entirely where in the world colleagues are joining us from today, so I'm going to say good afternoon, good evening, good morning to colleagues and attendees. So what I'm going to do today is just try to give you a little bit of a kind of taster, really, a bit of a flavour of some of the issues, the bigger issues that we will be picking up on within this programme. Not only in particular course units that form part of the bigger programme, but the issues that cut across the whole programme as well, that we'll kind of return to and explore through a range of different lenses. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about leadership and change. So before I do that, I'll kind of briefly introduce myself. So as Daisy said, my name is Dr. Paul Armstrong, and I'm the Deputy Course Director for the Educational Leadership in Practice programme here at the Manchester Institute of Education. I've been working in educational research and in academia for just over 16 years now. I have a background in psychology, and I'm kind of been interested in this notion of educational leadership and management, and what it is that those that work in schools and in leadership and management positions, what it is that they think they do, what it is that motivates them to do what they do, and also helping them to hopefully get better at what they do. And that's kind of, you know, where we're coming from with this particular program. Really, it's about supporting aspiring and existing school leaders to get better at what they do. So I'm a senior lecturer in education at the University of Manchester. As I said, I've been here for about 16 years now. I've worked in this field for a long time. And am I an expert? I've got a range of, I don't like to refer to myself as an expert. I'd like to say that I've got a lot of experience in this area of the field. I've worked all over the world on various projects in schools in a range of different contexts, and I suppose what I have is a wealth of knowledge and experience that I'm happy to share with people. What they do with that knowledge is up to them. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. There's a picture of me there looking a lot younger than I do today. I need to get a new photograph actually, because I don't think I even needed glasses when I had that taken. That perhaps was taken at the very first year of my 16 that I've been working at Manchester, by the looks of things. Okay, but through the Educational Leadership and Practice Programme, if you do decide to join us here at Manchester, and we hope that you do, you won't just be connecting with me. We have a world-leading academic research centre at the University of Manchester in respect of educational leadership and management. That's currently led by Dr. Steve Courtney. It was previously led by Professor Helen Gunter. And they're two sort of, really kind of big names, big hitters in the field of educational leadership and management. And you can find their research and their publications. A brief Google Scholar search, for example, would lead you straight to Helen's work. And it's difficult to, I would say, to look into educational leadership, particularly the history of educational leadership, without coming across Helen's work. So we've got a group of world-leading academics here, accompanied by myself, Paul Armstrong, Alex McTaggart, who directs the programme, and Dr. Stephen Rayner as well. And we have a range of other colleagues that work around this area as well, in slightly different areas of the field. So you'll be introduced to their work and to those individuals in person in a range of different ways throughout the programme. Okay. So before I begin today's sort of brief session, I just thought I'd pose this question to you. We thought it might be helpful to just have something to just kind of think about and consider as I'm talking to you today. And if we have time, we can return to this at the end of the session. But if not, it's just something for you to kind of reflect upon, really. And that question is, in what ways are notions of educational leadership and educational change connected? And I'm going to try to address that in my own sort of way over the next sort of 25 minutes or so. But of course, there are a range of different responses to that question. And that's the beauty of the social sciences, I suppose, and of working with human beings in social situations, which of course is exactly what working in schools it involves. It's unpredictable, and it's exciting, and it's interesting, and there are lots of different answers to questions. And so, in posing this question to you, it's I'm doing so to get you to kind of try and think and reflect upon your own perspectives on that particular question. And what your experiences of educational leadership and educational change are, and how you see them connected from your own kind of practice and your own context. Okay. So let's start with leadership. Now, in all my years of working in schools and reading and writing about educational leadership and leadership in general, one thing I've learned is that it is a very discursive term. There are a myriad of different ways in which leadership is understood and it's defined, and there are far too many to even do a PhD on, let alone fit into one slide. And we explore that in this program. I think we talk a lot about leadership. It's in the title of the program. It's about leadership, but we get you to think about those different theories and those different models of leadership and the different ways in which people from different parts of education in terms of academia and policy and practice understand what leadership is and what it means. Okay. So there are lots of different definitions, but within those definitions, there are some common themes and there are some recurring themes within the vast literatures on leadership, not just in education, but just generally, in respect of what it might be and what it might involve. And one of those themes is change. Okay, so I've listed a couple of definitions there. One from Gill and one from Hazy, Goldstein, and Lichtenstein. And these were kind of selected at random, really. I mean, I could have selected any others. It was really just to illustrate to you some of the kind of common themes that we see when people try to define what leadership involves. Okay, And we have things like from Gill here talking about and visioning, I say, so things like vision, a desired future, things like clear purpose and mission, and the promotion of those things, notions of values and strategizing, and empowerment and engagement. Okay. So some, big terms there, big words there, broad, sweeping sort of themes that, in and of themselves could encompass the whole field of study, I suppose. And then if we look at the second, definition there, and according to these four individuals, they refer to leadership as taking place during interactions among what they term as agents. Okay, when those interactions lead to changes in the way those agents relate to one another in the future. Okay, and they refer to changes in purpose, in strategy, and objectives, and changes in perceived norms as to what might be deemed acceptable in respect of choices and behaviours and communication. So I think from those two definitions, I think we can see quite clearly there that, lots and lots of scholars in the area of the field, and lots of individuals who've been involved with leadership are quite clear that one thing that leadership does involve is changing things. Okay, quite simply, hopefully for the better. But that's kind of what leaders are expected to do. They're expected to make decisions in order to change things, hopefully for the better. But that's kind of what they're tasked to do. Yeah. So if you're leading something, that's a big part of that leadership responsibility is that you're tasked with making decisions in respect of changing outcomes. Okay, and that can happen in a myriad of different ways. Okay. Now, when we think about change in education, I think it's wise to think about linking those changes with what Byrne and Oscar refer to there as macro social change. Okay, so actually, changes in schools at a micro level are often, almost always, influenced by changes outside of the school. Okay, and these typically can be referred to as kind of societal and political shifts, and that doesn't necessarily need to be something that's happened in a country level context, in terms of political shifts with a big P and societal shifts in a country context. That could be a local and regional political shifts, and it could be changes within a society at the sort of community level as well. But I think what I'm saying here is that schools, as with as an organization, do not exist in a vacuum. Okay, they are mirrors, if you like, or microcosms of the society in which they exist and of the communities that they serve. So often what happens outside of school has a direct influence on what happens in school. Okay. Now, I'm quite clear that that's the case, but the challenge with many academic theories and theories from the sort of business literatures around change and leadership is that they appear to disregard this assumption. And they talk about leadership and change as being quite a linear process and quite a simplistic process, and it's quite a decontextualized process. And that's helpful if we want to just get a kind of idea of the kind of things that leaders do and the kind of changes that they might make and how that might happen from quite a functional perspective. Okay. But when we try to sort of scale that up and understand leadership and change actually in practice, okay, so I'm linking this back to the program of study, to the education leadership in practice program here. If we try to think about leadership and change in respect of what leaders do in practice and what that actually means on a day-to-day basis, then often these theories they're not quite as useful, not quite as applicable. Okay. So, change in education requires a much more sort of nuanced mindset, and one that accounts for what I've termed there as the complexities of schools, and the social hubs driven by human interaction. Okay, and that refers back to what I was talking about before, that schools are places in which lots of human beings come together and interact in lots of different ways, and so trying to understand leadership and change in those kind of contexts requires quite a sort of nuanced perspective. Okay, so the models are helpful, but they don't tell you everything. Okay. So, Hyam and Early, two scholars from the UCL down in London, remind us that on a kind of global scale, the need for education change has often been cast in economic terms. Okay, and this notion that we have to have a workforce that's prepared to compete with other countries. Okay, so this idea that schools are the kind of driving force and the engine of supporting the development of a population that can facilitate that kind of competitiveness between countries. Okay, and often when politicians are talking about having to change education, those are the terms in which it's often been cast. Okay, and we can see that quote there from the OECD, a kind of a sort of high profile supra national organization that run the kind of PISA tests and all those sort of league tables that show how countries are performing against other countries in respect of the educational systems they have. And there's lots of ways we could problematize that, but they're quite interesting and insightful. And you can see, I won't read the quote out to you there, but you can see there that kind of summarizes what Hyman earlier is saying, really. And this notion of human resource and how it links with education and what education should be about. Okay. Now, Stephen Ball's written a lot about this. Again, he's retired now, but he worked at University College London for many years, and he refers to a discourse of derision and this idea that lots of change in education has occurred in the context of a large-scale criticism of schools. So this idea that schools and school systems are not functioning effectively, and they're not doing what they should be doing in order to address this kind of global race, if you like, that's referred to there in an OECD quote. So schools are derided, and therefore we need to change what's happening in schools. Okay. And typically what happens then is that we see changes in sort of governance structures. They tend to be the key proposals for educational reform. We've seen that in the United States over the last sort of 10, 20 years with the introduction of things like charter schools. There was the free school movement in Sweden, which inspired the academies program in England, which is still going at sort of full pelt, if you like. We still have a huge number of academy schools in England, and more will surely follow over the coming years. And again, it's what Hyman earlier referred to as kind of new forms of state control, if you like. But essentially, what they're saying is that, when educational change is proposed, it's often that governments can enact or facilitate that sort of change at that governance level by changing structures. Now, the extent to which that achieves its desired purpose is questionable. And again, these are things that we explore in more detail in the program, but it's just for today's purpose, just to kind of introduce you to this idea that why change is often seen as a desirable action to undertake for sort of national governments, and the kind of rationale that they often provide in order to push such change through. And then linked to all of these things is this notion of schools as a kind of commercial or market commodity. Okay, it's something that my colleague Steve Courtney, who I talked about before, has referred to a lot in his research here at Manchester, the corporatization of education, and this idea that we make schools and school systems much more marketized. And we see that with things like parental choice and competition between schools and league tables of how schools are performing, and with this real emphasis on standards and accountability and testing. Okay. However, if we keep on the theme of sort of macro level change, sometimes external factors beyond the control of governments and state mechanisms can actually be much more influential than the governments themselves. Okay, and the global pandemic that we are all living through at the moment is perhaps the strongest example of that I can probably think of. This is something that few people could have, I wouldn't say predicted, but it's certainly the way in which it's affected and changed everybody's lives, including the way in which it's changed the ways in which schools are run, was clearly not on anybody's radar this time last year. And already now we're not even 12 months into this current phase, this COVID-19 era, if you like, and it's already had a huge impact on schools. And may have more going forward. So in England, for example, we've had significant upheaval in terms of examinations and testing, and whether or not such exams should go ahead, whether they're even able to go ahead. What do we do if they don't go ahead? Can we allow students and pupils to leave school without any qualifications? Clearly not. That's not acceptable. So what do we do to address that? And this is going to run going on next year as well. Next year already, the Welsh government have cancelled all their examinations, and they're going to have to come up with a slightly different, more creative way of assigning students appropriate grades for the work that they've done, so that they can leave school with the qualifications that they require in order to continue in whatever it is they would like to do for the rest of their lives. So big issues around that, issues around how and when to reopen and in many countries keep open schools and what that would look like. And again, just in the news today in London, in a borough of London in Greenwich, we're seeing a kind of tug of war between the national government and the local government. The local government that want to close the schools this final week before the Christmas break, and the national government have overruled them. And parents and pupils are kind of caught in the middle, not really sure what's going on. And then that leads to other discussions around, face-to-face learning and whether it's safe and whether it's desirable and whether it's practical, or blended learning or distance learning or online learning. All these kind of huge issues that teachers and across the globe have been grappling with over the last 12 months. All of which have, highlight the continued and growing issue of education and social equity. And again, that's something that we do pick up on and that runs through the programme. But it serves as an example as to the kind of things that can facilitate educational change. Okay, so we have a global pandemic. Clearly, schools have to change the way in which they operate in order to respond to, possibly the most significant external occurrence that's probably happened in most of our lifetimes. Okay. So when we think about change and how we understand what it means and how it might be enacted purposely in schools, there's a range of literatures out there, and there's even a journal of educational change. So there's a specific journal that's devoted to the study of educational change. But there's no universal theory that of educational change that can be kind of meaningfully applied to every school and every context. So when we're thinking about effective change initiatives and what they might look like, it's important to remember that these need to be kind of flexible and context specific, which is tricky for policymakers, because when we're talking about context specific policy, it doesn't often align with kind of national scale up policy. Okay, it's quite tricky, which is often why large scale reforms in the past certainly have tended to fail, because change in education is a complex and unpredictable process, because of, for all the reasons I've explained earlier, the complex nature of schools as organizations, and often large scale reform agendas have kind of failed to pay due attention to that complexity, and have often failed. And there are lots of examples of that in the literature, certainly from the English school system where I'm situated. And school change, and change within schools is complex because it involves understanding and infiltrating and in many cases altering and changing the behavior of teachers and leaders and pupils and other members of the school community. It's often a cultural process, and trying to shift cultural behaviors is a very, very challenging thing to do because these things are kind of ingrained in our behavior and our habits. And how we sort of view the world. So it's a difficult thing to achieve in a sustained way, educational change. And what the literature tends to tell us is that successful change requires ownership and collaboration at the school level. Okay, so it's context specific. It's acknowledging of all the complexities of the school and the community it serves and those that work within the school and its pupils at its heart. But it requires a level of ownership and collaboration as well from those that work within the school. So teachers and school leaders in that respect need to be kind of actively involved in it and at least have some decision-making capacity within the change process, rather than feeling as if they're kind of just agents for a centrally imposed instruction, which I know many teachers, certainly again in England, have felt in many ways in respect of government policy over the last few years. So this leads us to think about kind of flatter leadership structures and different models where, those change initiatives that have been successful are those that have assumed a much flatter leadership structure where there's more ownership and more leadership distribution across staff members, and change is enacted in a more sort of democratic way, and I include the pupils in that statement as well. So everybody's got sort of feels like they've got ownership of it and they've got a say in what's happening, and they're not just sort of, as I said, acting out kind of centrally imposed instruction. And then, just to kind of reiterate, this sort of political, social, and economic conditions at both the local and national level must also be considered and understood. That's something else that comes out strongly in the literatures on change. And as I said before, centrally imposed change initiatives that do not account for these factors are often kind of doomed to fail. Daisy, how am I doing for time?
We're coming up to 1 o'clock, but it's all right, Paul. We can just go over for a couple of more minutes. I know you've got a few slides to go through, so don't worry.
Okay, no worries. Thank you, Daisy.
No problem.
Okay, so we can often link change to educational improvement as well. So change is clearly it's linked to leadership, it's linked to making things better, as I said before, and there's a huge body of research into school and educational improvement and effectiveness that is very much aligned with educational change. As I said before, this notion that change is a vehicle to make things better. And I've got a link here from a quote here from Hopkins, Ainscough and West. Mel Ainscough and West are two emeritus professors from the University of Manchester, talking there about educational change as having a twin purpose of enhancing student achievement and strengthening the school's capacity for managing change. You can see these things are all kind of interlinked and intertwined. And as I said before, educational change that directly impacts on the learning of students, which hopefully is kind of what all change should be about, really. It often involves changes in behaviours, and as I said before, it involves educators, teachers, rethinking what they do, and that might be gaining new knowledge, it might be adopting new behaviours or modifying their teaching styles, and it sometimes means modifying beliefs and values as well. So, as I said, it's tricky. It's behavioural, it's cultural, and it's quite difficult to kind of to embed. It involves changing ways of thinking and doing. Okay, and it's a personal and collective experience. It's characterized by ambivalence and uncertainty for the individual involved, and often change is characterized by kind of unexpected and uncontrollable consequences. And it's one of the reasons why, as human beings, we're so resistant to change, because we're often apprehensive about the unknown, okay, and about changing our routines and stepping into a space in which we might feel uncomfortable, okay. So in that respect, there are a number of barriers to change that often occur that we see repeated in the literature, and that's things relating to kind of power relations and social relations, people wanting to avoid conflict, competition for resources, or indeed inadequate resources in order to fulfill that change. And that might be staffing resources, it might be financial resources. There are often concerns about de-skilling. If we implement this change, does that mean that my job might not exist anymore, or will I not be required in the same way that I was? So it has implications for people's identities as well, and also the fear of failure. You know, if we change and try this new attempt at working, what if it fails? What if it's not right? You know, surely it's easier just to stay as we are. So all these things are important, and they bring to mind the idea that change in schools is very much a human endeavor. Okay, it's not just about functions and processes, it's about the human beings behind those processes and how they feel about it. Okay. So just to kind of wrap up and try and tie up some of those threads, and as I said, I apologize, it has been a very whistle-stop tour. Hopefully I've been able to give you a sort of flavor of some of the things that I promised I would do. But leadership and change, you know, educational leadership, I should say, involves creating and facilitating change. Okay. But educational leadership also involves responding to and engaging with and practicing under conditions of change. Okay, so it's not only that leaders are responsible in many respects for creating and facilitating change and making those decisions about how things might need to be changed, or at least creating the conditions in which colleagues can also support and be involved in that decision-making process. It also involves operating under conditions of change as well. And as I said before, the current global pandemic is a great example of that. Huge amounts of change going on outside the school, affecting what's happening in the school, and educational leaders have to kind of operate within that and sort of navigate that. You know, it's a tough ask. And so how educational leaders do that, how they navigate this, and the factors that facilitate and hinder their efforts to do so, it is really kind of central, really, to understanding what leadership in education is all about. And before I hand back over to Daisy, I suppose that final point there is kind of, you know, if you are interested in signing up for the program, and we sincerely hope that you are, that final point there is kind of the nub of what we'll be exploring throughout the program, and we'll probably keep returning to. And that the answer to that question will be different according to every single individual student that will sign up for this program. Okay. Right. Thank you for listening. Sorry if I've gone over slightly. And I'll hand back over to Daisy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for a really insightful and very topical session today. Change is definitely a word I've heard so much this year and probably will continue to in 2021 as well. So thank you everyone to kind of who've joined us live today and have listened. I hope you've enjoyed the session. I know I have. Just want to kind of reiterate my role again. So I really am here to support you in taking the next steps. So please do get in touch with me by emailing me. Setting up a Zoom consultation with me is something obviously that I enjoy doing and would love to get to know you as potential students. So what you can do is ask me questions and discuss your background in more detail with me so that you feel really ready to take the next steps in your application journey and hopefully join us in February 2021. Now, I want to kind of make this quite clear. Now, we've got an early application discount deadline and we've extended this just because we know that times have been a bit challenging over the last couple of months, but we want to give you a little bit more time to work on your application. So you've got until Friday the 8th of January to apply to this programme in order to be eligible for a 10% tuition fee reduction off the overall tuition fees. So bear that date in mind. Now, one thing I do want to mention is I will be on annual leave, as will our admissions team, from the 18th of December to the 4th of January. So if you want to get in touch with me this week, you've got a couple more days until I go off and enjoy the Christmas break. But I'll be back in action from the 4th. So get in touch with me in the new year and we can discuss the course and your eligibility and any questions that you have in more detail. Paul, just want to say another thank you for you running this session today. It's been really great. And if we don't have any further questions from our audience, I think we can kind of wrap up the session. Paul, do you want to add anything or are you happy to kind of wrap up?
No, not at all. Just thanks for listening. Thank you, Daisy, for organising this. And yeah, wish everybody a restful Christmas break. And hopefully we'll see some of you on the programme next year.
Brilliant. Thanks, Paul. And thanks to everyone who've joined us today. Take care.
Okay.